Freeze all outbound transfers. Now! Isabel Sterling's voice was a shard of ice in the overheated panic of the boardroom. The 48th floor of Sterling Innovations, encased in its billion-dollar view of the city, had become a pressure cooker. 6 men and women, the best minds in fintech, stared at the cascading lines of red text on the main holographic display, their faces pale in its hellish glow. "We can't," Isabel, Anand, her head of cybersecurity, stammered, his fingers flying across a tablet. "It's not a single breach. It's an automated algorithmic cascade. We shut one port, it reroutes through another. It's everywhere." "Define everywhere," Isabel commanded, her voice dangerously quiet. She stood perfectly still, a severe figure in a charcoal gray dress, her hands clasped behind her back. She didn't look at the panicked faces of her team. She looked at the data, the pure, unfeeling enemy. "It's draining our secondary liquidity pools. Fractions of a cent from each, but there are millions of them. The algorithm is now targeting Tier 2 client portfolios." A collective gasp went through the room. This was no longer an attack on the company. It was an attack on their clients. The end of Sterling Innovations. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass wall that separated the boardroom from the rest of the world, Elias Vance pushed a wide-base janitorial cart. The squeak of its wheels was an obscene sound against the backdrop of silent, digital Armageddon. He wore a plain gray uniform, his movements slow and deliberate as he sprayed a microfiber cloth and began polishing the chrome handle of the boardroom door. He was invisible, a ghost in the machine, and that was exactly how he wanted it. From his vantage point, he could see the display, a waterfall of encrypted code he wasn't supposed to understand. But he did. He saw the panic on the faces of people who earned more in a week than he did in a decade. They were looking for an exit, a way to stop the flow. But they were looking in the wrong place. They saw 1,000 tiny leaks, a dam crumbling everywhere at once. Elias saw something else. He saw a single, elegant, malicious piece of engineering. They were fighting a flood. They should be looking for the pump. A junior analyst, sweat beading on his forehead, burst from the boardroom, nearly colliding with Elias's cart. He was clutching a phone, shouting into it about server loads. Elias stopped polishing the handle. He spoke, his voice low and calm, barely a whisper. "It's not a drain." The analyst shot him a look of pure contempt. "Get out of the way." "It's a mirror," Elias continued, his eyes fixed on the display through the glass. "You're not losing data. It's being duplicated. The algorithm is creating a ghost ledger for every transaction, then authenticating it with a handshake protocol that's running in a recursive loop. The system sees 2 valid ledgers and is trying to reconcile them by splitting the assets. You're not being robbed. You're being forced to give it away." The analyst stared at him, mouth agape, a mixture of confusion and fury on his face. "What did you just say? Who the hell are you?" Elias ignored him. He saw Isabel Sterling's gaze flicker towards him through the glass. Her eyes, the color of a winter storm, met his for a fraction of a second. There was no panic in them, only a cold, calculating intelligence. He knew she was the only one who might listen. He pulled a small notepad and a pen from his breast pocket, the kind he used to jot down lists for his daughter, Lily. Milk, crayons, bear-shaped crackers. He scribbled a single line of code, a simple command to sever the authentication protocol at its root, not at its endpoints. It was a scalpel, not an axe. He held the small piece of paper up to the glass. Inside, the chaos continued. Anand was shouting about a total system shutdown, a catastrophic last resort. Isabel silenced him with a single, raised hand. Her eyes were locked on the janitor, on the nonsensical scribble he held against the glass that separated their 2 worlds. For a long moment, she just stared. The men and women around her followed her gaze, their expressions turning from panic to bewilderment. Then, she turned to Anand. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Run this command, exactly as written." She read the line of code from the napkin through the glass. Anand looked at her as if she were insane. "Isabel, that's a core protocol command. Could corrupt the entire primary ledger. Who gave you that? He glanced at the janitor with disgust. Run it, she repeated. It was not a request. With trembling hands, Anand typed the command into his console. He hit enter. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The red waterfall continued its descent. Then it stopped. A single line of green text appeared at the bottom of the screen. Authentication severed. Reconciliation halted. The room fell into a profound, echoing silence. The crisis was over. Isabel Sterling did not look at her jubilant team. She did not look at the screen. She looked through the glass, at the empty space where the janitor had been standing. Elias Vance and his cart were gone. He had already moved on down the hall to clean the next office. He had a schedule to keep, and a daughter to get home to. 2 hours later, Elias was on his knees in the cramped living room of his apartment, a world away from the sterile opulence of Sterling Innovations. The air smelled of disinfectant and, faintly, of the lavender-scented laundry soap he used for his daughter's clothes. He was meticulously reassembling the inner workings of a vintage music box, its tiny gears and pins spread across a soft cloth on the floor. Lily sat cross-legged beside him, her chin resting on her hand, watching his large, calloused fingers work with an impossible delicacy. Her silence was not empty. It was a space of deep concentration, a shared ritual. On the wall behind them, a dozen of her drawings were taped up, vibrant splashes of color against the beige paint. A smiling sun, a lopsided house, a stick figure of a man holding a little girl's hand. "It's like a puzzle, Daddy," she whispered, her voice soft. "The best kind of puzzle," he murmured, not looking up. "Every piece has exactly one place it can go. No guessing. Just order." A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from their front door. It was a sound that didn't belong here, a sound from the world he had left behind. Elias froze, a tiny brass cylinder held delicately in his tweezers. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, washed over him. He hadn't heard that kind of knock in 6 years. He placed the tool down with deliberate slowness. "Lily Bug," he said, his voice even. "Go to your room for a minute, okay? Finish your drawing of the dragon." She looked from him to the door, her brow furrowed with a child's intuition for adult fear. But she nodded, scrambling to her feet and disappearing into the small bedroom, closing the door behind her. Elias stood up, his body feeling heavy, ancient. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A woman in a dark suit stood in the dim hallway. He recognized her instantly, even without the glass wall between them. Isabel Sterling. He opened the door. She stood there, flanked by 2 men who were built like refrigerators, their eyes scanning everything. Her gaze, however, was fixed on him. It was just as intense and analytical as it had been in the boardroom, but now it was laced with something else. Impatience. Disbelief. "Elias Vance," she said. "It wasn't a question. You're a difficult man to find." "I'm not hiding," he lied. "Your employee file contains AP, O-Box, and a disconnected phone number. Your social security number was issued 6 years ago. Before that, according to the federal government, you did not exist." Her eyes swept past him, taking in the small, tidy apartment, the child's drawings, the disassembled music box on the floor. "I don't like mysteries, Mr. Vance. My name is Elias, and I'm a janitor." That's all. His hand was still on the doorknob, his body language a closed door. She ignored his dismissal. "The line of code you wrote saved my company approximately $17 billion this afternoon. A janitor doesn't know how to do that." "I got lucky," he said, his voice flat. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "I don't believe in luck. I believe in data. And the data tells me you are an anomaly. I want to know who you are." Elias felt the walls of his carefully constructed, invisible life begin to crack. The past he had buried under 6 years of grime and anonymity was threatening to surface. "What do you want from me, Miss Sterling?" "I want to hire you," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Our internal investigation found that the algorithm wasn't external. It was launched from inside our own network. There is a traitor in my company. Someone with high-level access and the skill to build a weapon like the one we saw today. My own team, the best in the world, was blind to it until it was almost too late. You saw it in minutes. He stared at her, his mind racing. This was exactly what he had run from. High stakes, powerful enemies, the kind of work that got people killed. The kind of work that had killed his wife. No, he said. The word was quiet but absolute. I'm not for hire. Everyone has a price, she countered, her arrogance a shield. You can't afford mine, he said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to put my daughter to bed. He began to close the door. Isabel put a hand out, stopping it. Her expression had shifted from command to something more complex. She wasn't used to being told no. I ran a threat assessment, she said, her voice dropping slightly. The person who did this is not just a thief. They were trying to bankrupt the company in a way that would trigger a hostile takeover by one of our rivals. They are sophisticated, ruthless, and they are still inside my walls. They will try again. I need someone they won't see coming. Someone who can move through the building unnoticed. Someone who understands the system from a perspective my own people lack. She was offering him a chance to be a ghost again, but a different kind of ghost. A hunter, not prey. The thought was terrifying and, to a part of him he thought was long dead, exhilarating. But the risk? The answer is no, he said again, more forcefully. Isabel Sterling held his gaze for a long moment. She seemed to be recalibrating, reassessing the man in front of her. She withdrew her hand from the door. Very well, she said, her tone crisp and businesslike once more. She reached into her suit jacket and produced a slim, metallic tablet. This is a data packet. It contains the raw server logs from the past 6 months, terabytes of information. My analysts have been combing through it for weeks, looking for the ghost signal that preceded today's attack. They found nothing. She held it out to him. This isn't a job offer, Mr. Vance. It's a test. If you can find it, the one signal they all missed, I will pay you enough money to disappear so completely that even I could never find you again. You and your daughter. You can have the life of quiet anonymity you so clearly crave, she paused, her eyes sharp. And if you can't, I'll leave you to it. But I will also open an official investigation into your past. And I assure you, my resources are considerable. It was blackmail, wrapped in the guise of a challenge. A gilded cage or an exposed ruin. Those were his choices. He looked from the tablet in her hand to the closed bedroom door, behind which his entire world was drawing a dragon. He had built this fragile piece for her, and now this woman threatened to shatter it. The only way to protect it might be to step back into the world he'd fled. The irony was a bitter pill. With a sigh that carried the weight of 6 years, Elias Vance took the tablet. Isabel Sterling's penthouse office was less a room and more a statement. It occupied the entire top floor, a monument of glass, steel, and stark white marble. The minimalist furniture seemed designed to be looked at, not used. The only personal touch was the view, a panoramic, godlike vista of the city, glittering like a spilled box of jewels against the black velvet of the night. It was a throne room, designed to amplify her power and isolate her from the world below. Elias stood in the center of the room, still in his janitor's uniform, feeling like a smudge on a pristine canvas. He hadn't touched the tablet she'd given him until Lily was asleep, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that was the only music that mattered to him. Then he had opened it. He'd expected a challenge. He hadn't expected it to be so familiar. The data wasn't just noise. It had a signature, a cadence. It reminded him of the work he used to do, the work that had cost him everything. A ghost of his former self had awakened, stretching muscles it hadn't used in years. Well, Isabel's voice cut through his thoughts. She sat behind a massive obsidian desk, a single illuminated screen before her casting her face in a cool, blue light. Elias placed the tablet on the corner of her desk. On its screen was a single line of data highlighted, a timestamp, an IP address, and a packet size. There, he said. Isabel leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She typed the coordinates into her own system. A complex star chart of data points appeared on her screen. That's impossible. My team analyzed this sector for weeks. It's a dead zone. Just routine system pings to a dormant communications satellite. It's not a dead zone, Elias explained, his voice taking on a detached, academic tone he hadn't used in years. It's a blind spot. Your analysts were looking for active signals, for noise. The ghost isn't in the noise. It's in the silence. He pointed to the tablet. Every 60 seconds, your system sends a handshake ping to that satellite. Standard procedure. But once every 4,822 pings, the satellite doesn't respond for an extra 32 milliseconds. Not a failed ping, just a delay. It's so small it registers as standard network latency. A statistical deviation so minor it's invisible. He could feel her attention sharpen, her focus becoming absolute. But it's not latency, he went on. It's a signal. In that 32 millisecond window, the satellite is opening a microchannel to a third party, bleeding a single packet of encrypted data, and then closing the channel before your system registers the anomaly. It's been happening for 7 months. It's brilliant. It's patient. And it's how the attacker exfiltrated the final command codes they use today. Isabel stared at the screen, her mind processing the information. She ran a diagnostic based on the pattern he'd described. Her system, now knowing what to look for, instantly flagged thousands of instances. A hidden highway of stolen data, revealed. She leaned back in her chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her stunned eyes. Her best and brightest, with all their resources, had been beaten. By a janitor. In 3 hours. "Who are you?" she asked again. But this time the question was different. It wasn't an accusation. It was a plea. Elias looked out the vast window at the city below. He saw the rooftops, the traffic, the anonymous lives. That was all he wanted. To be one of them. "I'm a father," he said, his voice quiet. "That's all that matters now." He turned back to her. "I found your ghost. Your part of the deal was to let me and my daughter disappear." "That deal is no longer on the table," Isabel said coolly. Elias's jaw tightened. "We had an agreement. The parameters have changed," she countered, standing up and walking around the desk to stand before him. She was shorter than him, but her presence was immense. Finding a signal is one thing. Understanding its architecture, its philosophy, that is something else entirely. The person who designed this is a genius. A dark one, but a genius nonetheless. I have an army of analysts. What I need is an artist. I need the person who built cases for the Justice Department's Financial Crimes Division for 10 years. The man they called the Oracle because he could see patterns in chaos that no one else could. The man who vanished 6 years ago after his wife, Assistant U.S. Attorney Anna Vance, was killed in a car accident that wasn't an accident. The air left Elias's lungs. The name, his wife's name, spoken aloud in this place, felt like a physical blow. The past wasn't just surfacing. It was reaching out to strangle him. "Your sealed records weren't easy to get," Isabel continued, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "But as I said, my resources are considerable. You didn't just disappear, Elias. You erased yourself. And you did it to protect your daughter." He felt a tremor in his hands and clenched them into fists at his sides. "This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," she shot back. "The person inside my company is just like the people who came after you. They are powerful, ruthless, and they hide in plain sight. You ran from them once. I am offering you the chance to hunt them." She gestured around the opulent office. "I will give you anything you need. A secure location for you and Lily. Unlimited resources. Complete anonymity within the company. You'll be my ghost, my secret weapon. No one will know you exist except me. In return, you will find the traitor who is trying to destroy my life's work." He thought of the knock on the door, the intrusion. He thought of the deal she'd offered. Disappear completely. It was a tempting lie. People like this, people who could unseal federal records, they never just let you go. He was in her world now, whether he liked it or not. The only choice was whether to be a pawn or a player. And then he thought of Anna, of her fierce, unyielding belief in justice. She had hunted monsters, and it had cost her everything. He had run. For 6 years, he had honored her memory by hiding. But maybe, just maybe, the best way to honor her was to finish her fight. "My evenings and weekends are my own," he said, his voice raspy. "No exceptions. My daughter comes first. Always." Isabel Sterling allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. "Agreed. Welcome to the hunt." Mr. Vance Elias's new office was in Subbasement 3, a windowless, 10-by-10-foot room that had once been a storage closet for obsolete server racks. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and dust. A single, powerful workstation sat on a metal desk, a stark contrast to the grimy, concrete surroundings. This was his world now. The guts of the machine, a ghost in the shell. It was perfect. For a week, he descended into the data streams of Sterling Innovations. Isabel had been true to her word. He had her personal credentials, a level of access so high that his digital footprint was indistinguishable from her own. He was a phantom, moving through financial records, email servers, and encrypted communications logs, invisible to the very security systems designed to detect such intrusions. He worked with a singular focus, the world outside his concrete box ceasing to exist. The janitor's uniform was gone, replaced by simple, dark clothes. But the mindset was the same. Move quietly, observe, leave no trace. He fell back into old rhythms, the familiar dance of numbers and code. He started not with the crime, but with the company itself, absorbing its structure, its pulse. He learned the flow of capital, the digital ticks of its executives, the faint electronic whispers in the architecture. He quickly discovered the attack he'd thwarted was just the tip of the iceberg. The real crime was far more subtle and had been going on for over a year. It was a classic salami-slicing scheme, but executed on a breathtakingly sophisticated scale. Fractions of a cent, shaved from millions of automated, high-frequency trades every day. The amounts were so minuscule they were written off as rounding errors by the system's accounting bots. But they weren't errors. They added up to thousands of dollars a day, millions a month. The stolen money was funneled through a labyrinth of offshore accounts before being converted into a portfolio of untraceable cryptocurrencies. But the thief wasn't just cashing out. The final step was the most audacious. The crypto was being used to systematically short-sell Sterling Innovations stock through a series of anonymous shell corporations. The trader wasn't just robbing the company. They were using its own money to bet against it, driving its value down, making it vulnerable. The algorithmic attack had been a shock tactic, designed to accelerate that decline and trigger the hostile takeover Isabel had feared. It was a plan of breathtaking elegance and cruelty. Every night, he would meet Isabel in her penthouse office. The contrast was jarring, from his concrete tomb to her glass palace. He would stand before her desk, a tablet in his hand, and deliver his report in a low, even voice. "The total amount siphoned is $387 million, he said on the 7th night. The city lights a cold, indifferent audience behind him. Isabel's face was grim. The number was significant, but it was the violation that truly angered her. "Can you trace it? To a person?" Elias shook his head. "No. The final consolidation account is a fortress. Military-grade encryption. Trying to break it would be like trying to knock down a mountain with a spoon. It would also announce our presence. Our ghost is patient. We have to be, too. So we're blind," she said, her frustration palpable. "Not blind," Elias corrected. "We're watching. I can't see inside the account, but I can see the box itself. I flagged it. Any activity, any transaction, any access attempt, we'll know." Isabel studied him, her gaze intense. In the past week, her perception of him had fundamentally shifted. The janitor was gone, replaced by this quiet, unervingly competent analyst. He spoke of billion-dollar systems and encrypted fortresses with the calm authority of a master craftsman discussing his trade. He was a weapon, and she was learning how to aim him. "You're enjoying this," she stated. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Elias was silent for a moment. Was he enjoying it? The intellectual challenge, the sense of purpose. It was a dangerous narcotic, one he hadn't allowed himself in years. It felt like coming home to a place he had sworn he would never visit again. "I'm effective," he replied, deflecting the personal insight. "There's a difference." "Is there?" she pressed, intrigued by the man behind the skill. "What happened to your wife? The case she was working on. Was it like this?" The question hung in the air between them. Elias's posture stiffened. He looked away from her, towards the glass, at his own faint reflection. A flash of memory, sharp and unwelcome. Anna, laughing across a desk buried in files, her eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. "We've got them, Eli. They're smart, but they're arrogant." "The enemy is the same," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Rich, powerful, and they believe they're above the rules." He turned back to her, his eyes holding a cold fire she hadn't seen before. "They're not." A new dynamic was forming in those late-night meetings. The transactional relationship was still there, but it was now threaded with a reluctant respect. She saw his brilliance, and he, in turn, was beginning to see past her icy, commanding exterior. He saw the immense pressure she was under, the weight of the empire she had built, and the profound solitude of her position. The glass walls of her office, he realized, were as much a prison as they were a fortress. They were two isolated people, allied against a common, unseen enemy. One night, as he was about to leave, she stopped him. "Vance." He turned. "The board is getting restless," she said. "Rumors of the attempted breach are leaking. Our stock is volatile. They're demanding answers I can't give them without exposing our investigation." "What are you telling them?" he asked. "That our systems are secure. That it was an external probe, thwarted by our security team." She paused. "Our CFO, Marcus Thorne, is being particularly insistent. He's demanding a full external audit." Elias went still. "An audit?" "He says it's the only way to reassure the shareholders. He's pushing hard for it." A cold knot formed in Elias's stomach. An external audit would be a disaster. A team of outsiders crawling all over the system would be noisy, clumsy. They would either find nothing, giving the traitor a clean bill of health, or they would stumble upon Elias's own phantom activities, exposing him and the secret investigation. "You can't let that happen," Elias said. "I'm already losing the argument," Isabel admitted, a rare crack in her armor of control. "Marcus is a powerful voice on the board. He's been with the company since the beginning. He has their trust." "Stall them," Elias urged. "Buy me more time. The traitor is making a mistake. They always do. Arrogance is a fatal flaw." He left her office that night with a gnawing sense of urgency. The hunt had been a quiet, intellectual exercise. But now, the beast they were hunting was beginning to stir, and it was closer than they imagined. The alarm on Elias's workstation blared 2 days later, a shrill, digital shriek in the silence of the sub-basement. It was the alert he had set on the encrypted consolidation account. For the first time in 9 days, the box was active. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He watched the screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard. It wasn't an incoming or outgoing transaction. It was an access query. A simple ping to verify the account's status. But the query wasn't random. It had occurred at 2:17 p.m. He brought up Isabel's official corporate schedule. At 2 p.m., an emergency board meeting had been convened. A meeting pushed for and chaired by the CFO, Marcus Thorne. The topic, the immediate necessity of an external security audit. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. He started cross-referencing network access logs for the exact second of the query. Thousands of employees were active. It was a needle in a digital haystack. But Elias wasn't looking at the haystack. He was looking for the shadow of the needle. He filtered out all standard network traffic, all automated processes, all low-level employee activity. He was left with only the highest-level executive protocols. And there it was, A ghost signal routed through 3 separate internal servers before making the jump to the encrypted account. The point of origin was a terminal registered to the main boardroom. The trader wasn't just on the board. They had accessed their secret account during the board meeting. It was an act of supreme arrogance. They were sitting in the same room as Isabel Sterling, arguing for an audit to cover their tracks, while simultaneously checking on the money they had stolen. He had a location and a time. Now he needed a name. The pool of suspects had shrunk from thousands to a handful of the most powerful people in the company. The COO, the CTO, the head of global strategy, and Marcus Thorne, the CFO. That evening, he laid it all out for Isabel in her office. She listened without interruption, her face an unreadable mask, but he could see the tension in her hands, clasped tightly on the desk in front of her. "It's one of them," she said, her voice a low whisper. The names represented people she had worked with for years, people she had trusted. The betrayal was a fresh wound on top of an old scar. "Thorne is the most likely candidate," Elias said, thinking aloud. "He's the one pushing for the audit. It's a classic misdirection. Create a fire over here to draw attention away from the real crime over there. As CFO, he has the deepest knowledge of the financial systems the trader exploited." "Marcus," Isabel shook her head, a flicker of denial in her eyes. "He helped me build this company. He was my father's friend." "Trust the data," Elias said softly, echoing the philosophy she herself lived by. "The data points to him." "It's not enough," she said, her voice hardening again. "Circumstantial evidence won't be enough to convince the board. It will look like I'm trying to silence a dissenting voice. I need definitive, irrefutable proof." "Then I'll get it," Elias promised. He returned to his concrete cell with a renewed sense of purpose. He began a deep dive into Marcus Thorne's digital life. It was a fortress even more secure than the company's. Thorne was meticulous, a digital ghost in his own right. But everyone leaves a trace. A forgotten file, a careless email, a moment of weakness. 2 days later, Elias's server access was suddenly cut off. He typed a command and was met with a blunt, red wall of text. "Access denied. User credentials revoked." He tried again. Same result. He was locked out. He immediately called Isabel on the secure line she had given him. "I've lost access," he said, his voice tight with urgency. He heard her typing on her end. A moment of silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "Marcus," she said, her voice laced with disbelief and fury. "He just pushed through a company-wide security protocol update. Citing potential vulnerabilities from the recent breach, he's locked down all high-level credentials, including mine, pending a full system diagnostic. He's boxed me out of my own company." The move was brilliant. Under the guise of corporate security, Thorne had blinded them. He had sensed the investigation getting close and had slammed the door shut. He was taking control. "Isabel," Elias said, his voice low and steady. "This is it. This is the confirmation. An innocent man doesn't do this. He knows we're looking. He's panicking. Knowing it and proving it are two different things." She shot back, the frustration clear in her voice. "He's buried us in procedure. It will take days, maybe weeks, to untangle this." "We don't have weeks," Elias said. "He's making his move now. He's isolating you, seizing control of the information flow. The next step is to use that control to remove you." A heavy silence fell over the line. Elias could almost feel Isabel's mind racing on the other end, processing the terrifying new reality. The traitor wasn't just a thief anymore. He was making a play for the throne. "There is one back door," Isabel said finally, her voice resolute, "into the system's core architecture. It was built into the original code, a failsafe I designed myself. Only one person has the key. You," Elias stated. "Yes," she said, "but using it is the nuclear option. It creates a record that is permanent and visible to the entire board. If I use it to grant you access, and you find nothing, Marcus will have everything he needs to paint me as paranoid and unstable. He'll have me removed." It was the ultimate gamble. She would be betting her entire company, her entire career on him. On the word of a ghost she'd hired out of a janitor's closet. "Do it," Elias said, his voice unwavering. He heard her take a deep breath. "The key is on its way to your terminal. Find him, Vance. Burn him to the ground." The access Isabel granted him was like being handed the keys to the universe. He was no longer moving through the corridors of the system. He was in the walls, the foundation, the very source code from which it was born. And with this new, absolute power, he finally found the crack in Marcus Thorne's armor. It was a fragment of a deleted file on a partitioned section of Thorne's personal network drive, a space so deeply buried it was missed by the system's routine data purges. It was a cashed invoice from a private security firm. The invoice was for a risk assessment and surveillance package. The target of the surveillance was a name Elias didn't recognize. But the address listed was his own. Thorne had been having him followed. A cold dread, colder than the refrigerated air of the subbasement, washed over Elias. This changed everything. The hunt was no longer a detached, intellectual game of chess. The monster he was hunting was looking back, and it knew where he lived. He worked with a frantic, controlled energy. His focus narrowed to a single, terrifying point. He needed to warn Isabel. He needed to get home. He was about to call her when he found the second file. It was a geotagged photo taken that morning. A picture of Lily's elementary school from across the street. His blood ran cold. He didn't call. He didn't log out. He simply stood up, knocking his chair over, and ran. He sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors of the subbasement, up flights of stairs, ignoring the elevators. He burst into the bright, polished lobby, a wild look in his eyes, drawing stunned stares from the security guards. He didn't stop. He ran out into the street, shoving his way through the afternoon crowds, his lungs burning, his mind a maelstrom of pure, primal fear. The run to his apartment was a blur of traffic and noise. He fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so violently he could barely fit the key in the lock. He threw the door open. The apartment was silent, too silent. "Lily?" he called out, his voice cracking. Nothing. He walked slowly through the small living room. Everything was in its place. The music box, now fully assembled, sat on the coffee table. Lily's half-finished drawing of a dragon was on the floor where she'd left it. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing was out of place. Except for the door. When he'd arrived, it had been locked. He was sure of it. But now he saw the faint scratches on the jamb, near the deadbolt. Someone had picked the lock. Someone had been inside. He walked to Lily's bedroom and pushed the door open. The room was tidy, her stuffed animals arranged neatly on her pillow, and in the very center of her perfectly made bed lay a single black leather glove. It was expensive, impeccably stitched, the kind a man of wealth and power would wear. It was a message, a violation, a threat of unimaginable cruelty. "I was here. I can be here any time I want. I can touch what is most precious to you." Elias sank to his knees, the strength leaving his legs. The carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart, around his past, crumbled into dust. The terror he had lived with for 6 years, the terror of losing Lily the same way he had lost Anna, was no longer a phantom. It was real. It was here. It had a name. Marcus Thorne. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed Isabel's number. She answered on the first ring. "Vance? What is it? Did you find something?" He couldn't speak for a moment, his throat tight with a fear so profound it was suffocating. "He knows," Elias finally managed to choke out. "He knows who I am. He knows about Lily. He told her about the surveillance, the photo, the glove." For the first time since he'd met her, Isabel Sterling was silent. The silence stretched, filled only by Elias's ragged breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. The ice was gone, replaced by a cold, hard fury. "He made a mistake," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "He thinks he's targeting your weakness. He doesn't realize he just targeted mine." The line went quiet for a moment. He could hear her issuing commands to someone in the background. Pack a bag for you and Lily. 1 bag. My head of security will be at your door in 10 minutes. You're not staying there tonight. Where are we going? Elias asked, his mind numb. You're coming with me, Isabel said. There was no room for argument in her voice. He wanted to make this personal. Congratulations to him. He just got his wish. This was the turning point. The moment the war ceased to be about data and stock prices and became about something far more elemental. It was no longer Isabel's company. It was Elias's daughter. And for Isabel, who had nothing and no one to protect, the sudden, fierce, protective instinct that rose in her was as terrifying as it was powerful. The line had been crossed. Marcus Thorne had just made an enemy of 2 ghosts, not 1. And he was about to learn how cold the shadows could be. The secure apartment was in a sleek, anonymous glass tower in a different part of the city, a building owned by one of Isabel's holding companies. It was 3 times the size of Elias's own apartment, furnished with the same expensive, minimalist taste as her office. It felt less like a home and more like a luxurious, gilded cage. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the skyline, but they were reinforced, unbreakable. The door was a slab of solid steel. Lily, oblivious to the terror that had propelled them here, thought it was a grand adventure. She pressed her hands against the cool glass of the window, looking down at the toy-sized cars below. Are we on a spaceship, Daddy? Elias managed a weak smile, his heart aching. Something like that, Lilybug. Isabel arrived an hour after they did. She wasn't wearing her usual severe business attire. She was dressed in dark jeans and a simple black sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked younger, less formidable, but her eyes held a new, harder intensity. She was carrying a large, ornate wooden box. She walked over to Lily, who looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. "Hello, Lily," Isabel said, her voice softer than Elias had ever heard it. "I brought you something." She knelt, placing the box on the floor. It was a Japanese puzzle box, a beautiful object of interlocking wooden pieces. "There's something inside," Isabel explained, "but you can't open it with a key. You have to solve it." Lily's eyes lit up. She loved puzzles. She immediately sat on the floor and set to work, her small fingers tracing the seams of the box, completely absorbed. Isabel stood and turned to Elias. "My security team is sweeping your old apartment and has a 24/7 watch on the school. He won't get near her again. I promise you that." "Thank you," Elias said, the words feeling inadequate. "This is no longer just about my company," she said, her gaze firm. "This is about justice. The kind the law doesn't always provide." They set up a new command center in the apartment study. 2 powerful workstations, side by side. For the next 48 hours they worked. They didn't just work. They waged a silent, furious war. The dynamic between them had irrevocably shifted. They were no longer employer and employee. They were partners united by a shared threat and a shared purpose. The late nights were fueled by black coffee and a quiet, desperate intensity. They spoke in the clipped shorthand of people who understood each other perfectly, their thoughts moving in sync. The barriers between them began to dissolve, worn away by proximity and the raw, exposed nature of their situation. One night, staring at a screen of impenetrable encryption, Isabel spoke, her voice quiet. "I had a partner once, before Sterling Innovations." Elias turned to look at her. Her face was illuminated by the glow of the monitor, her expression unguarded for the first time. "His name was Julian," she continued, her eyes fixed on the screen, but seeing something far in the past. "We started a small data analytics firm right out of school. We were brilliant together. I was the architect, he was the visionary. We were more than business partners," she paused. "I trusted him, completely, with my ideas, my future, with everything. When we were on the verge of a major breakthrough, a contract that would have made us, he sold our proprietary algorithm to our biggest competitor. He took my work, my name off the patents, and tried to force me out. He told me business was never personal. It was just about the numbers. She finally looked at Elias. That's when I learned to trust only data. I built Sterling Innovations on that principle. A fortress of numbers. I thought it was impenetrable. Elias listened, understanding the deep scar that had shaped the woman she had become. He saw the fortress she had built around herself, and he understood why. He decided to offer a piece of his own shattered past, a truth he hadn't spoken aloud to anyone in 6 years. "My wife, Anna," he began, his voice thick with memory. She was a prosecutor, fearless. She saw the world in black and white, good and evil. She was building a case against a financial syndicate, the kind of people who start wars and topple governments with a keystroke. I was helping her unofficially. I was the one tracing their money, untangling their network. He stared at his own hands, resting on the keyboard. They were untouchable, protected by layers of wealth and power. But Anna found a way in. She was close, so close. They got scared. They ran her car off a bridge on a rainy night. The police report said it was an accident. Black ice. I knew it wasn't. A single intrusive flash of memory. Screeching tires, the sickening crunch of metal, a lifetime of silence. He pushed it down, his jaw tight. After the funeral, they came for me. They wanted the evidence I had, the pieces of the puzzle that only I held. I knew they wouldn't stop until they had it, or until I was silenced. And I knew they wouldn't hesitate to use Lily to get to me. He finally met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a profound, ancient grief. So I burned it all. The evidence, my career, my name. I took my daughter and I became a ghost. I thought if I was invisible, I could keep her safe. The confession hung in the air, a shared moment of vulnerability that forged a bond stronger than any contract. Isabel reached out, her fingers hesitating for a second before lightly touching his arm. It was a simple, fleeting gesture, but it was an earthquake. "You're not invisible anymore, Elias," she said softly. A new resolve hardened in his eyes. "Good," he said. Let him see me. The revelation of their pasts acted as a catalyst. The hunt was no longer just a reaction to Thorne's threat. It was a focused, relentless offensive. Elias, now driven by a cold, righteous fury, changed his tactics. He had been looking for a direct link from Thorne to the crime. Now he started looking for accomplices. Arrogant men like Thorne rarely worked alone. They required an ecosystem of sycophants and subordinates to execute their plans. He began by mapping Thorne's digital and physical life with obsessive detail. His expense reports, his corporate travel, his private security contracts. He found a shell corporation, based in Delaware, that had been used to pay the surveillance firm that targeted him. The same shell corporation owned a private jet. "He's sloppy," Elias murmured, staring at the screen in the pre-dawn hours. Isabel was asleep on the couch in the study, a rare moment of rest. He didn't want to wake her yet. He pulled the jet's flight manifests for the past year. There were dozens of trips to financial hubs, London, Zurich, Singapore, and 5 trips to the Cayman Islands, a notorious haven for hiding money. The passenger lists for the Cayman trips were always small, and one name appeared on all of them, a Mr. C. O. Masterson. Elias's fingers paused over the keyboard. C. O. Masterson felt staged, too perfect. He typed the name into a decryption program, running anagram algorithms against it. The result flashed on the screen almost instantly. Master Coin. A surge of adrenaline shot through him. It was a taunt, a piece of brazen arrogance left behind by a man who believed he was untouchable. He followed the trail of the Shell Corporation, cross-referencing its financial dealings with known cryptocurrency exchanges. He found it, a massive, institutional-grade crypto wallet, opened under the name Master Coin, that had been used in the short selling of Sterling Innovation stock. He had found the weapon. Now he needed to tie it to Thorne's hand. The wallet was protected by layers of security, but Elias wasn't trying to get in. He was looking for a mistake, a single moment of carelessness. He began analyzing the metadata of every transaction ever made from the wallet, thousands of them. It was a painstaking, mind-numbing process. Hours passed. The sun began to rise, painting the city in shades of orange and pink. Isabel stirred on the couch, then sat up, rubbing her eyes. Anything? Maybe, Elias said, his eyes not leaving the screen. I have his crypto wallet. The one he used to fund the short selling. She was instantly awake, moving to stand behind him. Can you prove it's his? Not yet. He's been careful. Always uses a VPN, always routes through multiple proxies. There's no direct digital link. He continued to scroll through the transaction logs, his eyes scanning the endless lines of code. And then he saw it. A single anomaly. One transaction 7 months ago, a minor transfer of funds to a secondary wallet. The transaction itself was insignificant, but the metadata was not. For a fraction of a second, the VPN on the user's end had dropped. The connection had failed to initialize for less than half a second before re-engaging. It was a 1 in a million fluke. But in that half second, the system had logged a geolocation tag. A raw, unmasked GPS coordinate. Elias's breath caught in his throat. He copied the coordinates and pasted them into a satellite mapping program. The image zoomed in from the continent to the city to a single building. The Sterling Innovations Tower. He refined the search using the building's own internal schematics. The coordinates resolved to a single point. The 48th floor, the executive wing. Oh, you son of a bitch, Elias whispered. What is it? Isabel demanded, her hand on his shoulder. He pointed to the screen, to the pinpoint of light that marked the origin of the signal. The executive bathroom, he said, his voice tight. The one adjacent to the main boardroom. Isabel stared, her face ashen. That bathroom has biometric locks. Only 3 people have access. You, Elias said, looking up at her. My CO Elizabeth Chen, Isabel continued. And Marcus Thorne. There it was. The smoking gun. The single, irrefutable piece of data that tied Marcus Thorne to the entire conspiracy. The final piece of the puzzle. They had him. Isabel backed away from the screen, a look of cold fury on her face. She walked to the window and stared out at her city, her company. He's not just trying to take it from me, she said, her voice dangerously calm. He's been using the stolen funds, through a hostile investment group called Argentis Capital, to acquire a controlling interest in Sterling. He's been buying my own company out from under me with my own money. She turned back to him, her eyes like chips of flint. The annual shareholders' meeting is in 2 days. That's his endgame. Argentis will announce a formal takeover bid. And Marcus, from the inside, will deliver the votes from the board members he's turned. He plans to execute me in my own throne room. Then we have to move now, Elias said, standing up. No, Isabel countered. A quiet removal isn't enough. He tried to destroy my legacy. He threatened your child. This requires a more public form of justice. We are going to let him walk into that meeting thinking he has already won. She looked at Elias, a predatory smile touching her lips for the first time. And then we're going to burn his world down. In front of everyone, the main boardroom on the 48th floor was filled to capacity. The air was thick with tension and the scent of expensive cologne. The entire board of directors, along with key shareholders and division heads, sat around the enormous granite table. It was a sea of dark suits and grim faces. The mood was not celebratory. It was funereal. The rumors of the company's instability, carefully fanned by Marcus Thorne, had done their work. Isabel Sterling sat at the head of the table, a portrait of calm authority. She looked serene, composed, almost placid. To the board, she looked like a queen about to be deposed. Marcus Thorne sat to her right. He was the picture of confidence, a faint, smug smile playing on his lips. He leaned back in his chair, exuding an aura of control. He had spent the last 48 hours consolidating his power, securing his votes. He believed the game was already over. He glanced at Isabel, a flicker of pity and contempt in his eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, Isabel began, her clear voice cutting through the low murmur of the room. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Before we address the agenda, we have a critical security issue to discuss. A ripple of concern went through the room. Marcus's smile widened slightly. This was it. She was about to flounder, to make excuses. He was ready to step in and seize the narrative. Isabel nodded towards the glass doors of the boardroom. I'd like to introduce a new consultant to the board. Our new chief of risk assessment. The doors slid open. Elias Vance walked in. He wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform or the simple, dark clothes of a ghost. He was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that Isabel had provided. It fit him like a second skin. His hair was cut, his jaw was set. He was no longer the invisible man. He was Elias Vance, the Oracle, and he looked like he belonged there more than anyone else in the room. A collective gasp went through the room. They recognized him. He was the janitor, the man who polished the floors. Marcus Thorne's face went white. The smug confidence vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at Elias as if he were seeing a ghost, which, in a way, he was. Elias said nothing. He walked calmly to the head of the table, placed a slim datapad down, and plugged it into the room's holographic display system. He looked at Marcus, his eyes cold and steady. A silent declaration of war. With a tap on the screen, the show began. He didn't narrate. He didn't accuse. He simply let the data speak. A complex, elegant web of information filled the air above the table. First, the river of siphoned funds, flowing from Sterling Innovations into the labyrinth of offshore accounts. Then, the creation of the shell corporation Mastercoin LLC. The flight manifests of the private jet to the Cayman Islands, with C.O. Masterson's name highlighted in red. The room was utterly silent, all eyes locked on the damning evidence. Marcus was frozen in his chair, his face a ghastly shade of gray. Elias continued. He displayed the crypto wallet, showing the direct flow of funds from the shell company into the short selling of Sterling stock. He brought up the portfolio of Argenis Capital, the hostile investment firm, and highlighted the exact blocks of shares that had been purchased with the stolen money. He was methodically, dispassionately, dissecting Thorne's entire conspiracy. And then, for the finale, he brought up the satellite map. He showed the single, careless transaction. He zoomed in on the city, the building, the floor. He displayed the biometric access logs for the executive bathroom, showing only 3 names. He highlighted Marcus Thorne's entry stamp, timed to the exact nanosecond of the unmasked transmission. He had built a cage of pure data around Marcus Thorne, and he had just slammed the door. Marcus finally broke. He shot to his feet, his chair screeching back. This is absurd. A fabrication. This janitor has doctored this information at her behest. He roared, pointing a trembling finger at Isabel. She's trying to frame me to prevent the vote of no confidence. Several board members looked uncertain, the accusation hanging in the air. A well-crafted lie could still beat a mountain of evidence. Isabel remained perfectly calm. You're right, Marcus, she said, her voice soft. Digital evidence can be manipulated, which is why we acquired something a little more analog. She tapped her own console. An audio file began to play, its sound crisp and clear in the silent room. It was Marcus Thorne's voice. The board is spooked, Thorne's voice said. Isabel is telling them she's negotiating a secret merger with Omnicorp to stabilize the stock. It's a bluff. Omnicorp isn't buying. Proceed with the Argenis bid as planned. She's isolated. By the time the meeting is over, I'll be in control. Isabel stopped the recording. She looked at Marcus, her eyes filled with cold triumph. There is no merger with Omnicorp. There never was. It was a piece of false information I seeded with exactly one person 24 hours ago. You. After we discovered the listening device you had planted in my office, the last of the color drained from Marcus's face. He was trapped. Utterly and completely. The board stared at him, their faces masks of horror and disgust. It was over. But in that final moment of desperation, the cornered animal did what cornered animals do. He lunged. Not at Isabel, not at Elias. He scrambled towards a small, Red panel on the wall near the door. The emergency data perch. The kill switch for the company's central servers. If he couldn't have the company, he would burn it to the ground. Security was already moving, but they were too far away. Marcus's fingers were inches from the panel. Elias moved with a liquid speed that seemed impossible. He didn't run. He flowed. He intercepted Marcus, not with a clumsy tackle, but with a precise, economical movement. He gripped Marcus's lunging arm, twisted his body, and used the man's own momentum against him. There was a sharp, clean crack as he applied a simple joint lock to Thorne's shoulder. Marcus screamed, a raw, animal sound of pain and defeat, and collapsed to the floor. Elias stood over him, not even breathing hard. It was a move born of a forgotten life, a muscle memory of the self-defense he had learned after Anna's death, preparing for a fight he had instead chosen to flee. The fight was over. He hadn't run this time. Security flooded the room, hauling a whimpering, broken Marcus Thorne to his feet. As they dragged him away, his eyes met Elias's one last time. They were filled not with hatred, but with utter, baffled disbelief. He had been undone by a ghost. In the aftermath of the confrontation, a stunned silence held the boardroom captive. The board members stared at the empty space where Marcus Thorne had stood, then at Elias, then at Isabel, their minds struggling to process the corporate coup they had just witnessed. Isabel Sterling rose to her feet, her composure absolute. "The threat has been neutralized," she announced, her voice resonating with newfound, unquestionable authority. "Sterling Innovations is secure." She didn't wait for questions. She turned and walked out of the room. Elias followed, the board parting for them like the Red Sea. The media firestorm was immediate and ferocious. But Isabel, with Elias now acting as her silent, strategic advisor, controlled the narrative with masterful precision. Thorne was not a symptom of a sick company, but a cancer that had been expertly excised. The story became one of strength, resilience, and the unbreachable security of Sterling Innovations under its brilliant and decisive CEO. The stock, after an initial dip, rebounded with a vengeance. The failed takeover bid from Argente's capital collapsed under the weight of its own scandal. Later that evening, Elias stood with Isabel in her penthouse office. The city lights below seemed brighter, clearer. The tension of the past weeks had been replaced by a quiet, shared sense of victory. "The board has offered Marcus's seat to you," Isabel said, watching his reflection in the glass, "along with the formal title of Chief Risk Officer. It comes with a salary that would make your old life difficult to remember." Elias thought of the sub-basement, of the gray uniform, of the invisibility he had craved for so long. It had been a shield, but it had also been a cage. "I don't hide anymore," he said. It was a simple statement, but it held the weight of a lifetime. He was accepting more than a job. He was reclaiming a life. Isabel walked to stand beside him at the vast window. For a long time, they just looked out at the sprawling metropolis. "I used to see this as a fortress," she said softly, gesturing to the glass walls. "A way to keep the world out, to keep things clean, orderly, predictable." She turned her head to look at him, a hint of a smile on her lips. "You are the most unpredictable variable that has ever entered my life, Elias Vance." "Is that a bad thing?" he asked, his own smile mirroring hers. "The data is still inconclusive," she replied, the faintest hint of warmth in her cool, gray eyes. The professional barrier between them had vanished, but the personal one remained, a fragile, shimmering thing full of unspoken potential. They were two people who had been saved by the other, their solitary worlds now irrevocably intertwined. They had a company to rebuild, a future to secure. But for the first time, neither of them felt like they would be doing it alone. The foundation for something more than a partnership had been laid, as solid and real as the bedrock beneath the towering skyscraper. 6 months later, the view was the same from the top floor of the Sterling Innovations Tower, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The glass walls no longer felt like a barrier but a lens, focusing the vibrant energy of the city into the room. Elias Vance stood at the head of the long conference table, the same one where he had dismantled Marcus Thorne's life. He was commanding the room, not with threats or volume, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his worth. He was leading a meeting with the company's division heads, outlining a new, proactive risk assessment strategy he had designed. He was no longer a ghost or a weapon. He was a leader, respected, admired. When the meeting concluded and the executives filed out, murmuring their approval, Isabel entered from her adjoining office. She leaned against the doorframe, a genuine, easy smile on her face. "They were terrified of you 6 months ago," she said. "Now they're quoting you." "People respond to competence," he replied, a familiar echo of her own past words. He walked over to her, their proximity comfortable, natural. The space between them was no longer charged with tension, but with a warm, settled familiarity. They were partners in every sense of the word. The door to the office slid open and Lily ran in, her pigtails flying behind her. She was clutching a piece of paper. "Daddy, look!" she exclaimed. She launched herself at Elias, who effortlessly scooped her up into a hug. "I see, Lilybug. It's beautiful." Then, Lily wriggled out of his arms and ran to Isabel. Without a moment's hesitation, she wrapped her small arms around Isabel's legs. "I made one for you, too, Isa." Isabel, the woman once known as the Ice Queen, froze for only a heartbeat before a soft, wondrous expression transformed her face. She knelt down, her movements fluid and unrehearsed, and hugged the little girl back. "Thank you, Lily," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion Elias had never heard from her before. Lily held up the drawing. It was a child's masterpiece of wax crayon. A big, smiling sun shone down on a lopsided house with a red door, and standing in front of the house were 3 stick figures: a tall man, a tall woman with dark hair, and a small girl in the middle. They were all holding hands. It wasn't a picture of allies or colleagues. It was a picture of a family. Elias came to stand behind them, placing a hand on Isabel's shoulder. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a light that had nothing to do with the city's reflection. In her gaze he saw not just a partner, but a future. The silence between them was filled with a perfect, unspoken understanding. They had both been hiding from the world in their own way. He in the shadows, she in her tower. But together they had found their way into the light. Elias looked out at the sprawling city, no longer a place to get lost in, but a landscape of possibilities they would navigate together. Sometimes the greatest risks we take are not in business or in battle, but in the quiet decision to trust another person with our broken pieces. Have you ever found strength in an unexpected alliance? Let us know in the comments below. And for more stories about hidden heroes and second chances, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.